Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland. Summer, 1954. The Sheppard family home stood in a place where tragedy was not expected. A quiet street, neatly trimmed lawns, neighbors who greeted each other by name and didn't ask unnecessary questions. It was a neighborhood of confident people, those who believed that a proper life protected them from improper things. Dr. Samuel Sheppard was well known here, an osteopath, a former athlete, a respected man with a smile people trusted. Patients knew him, police officers knew him, journalists knew him. Almost no one knew his wife. Marilyn Sheppard rarely drew attention to herself. She didn't like being loud, didn't argue, and almost never complained. She was the kind of woman people described as a good wife, and that seemed to say everything. She was expecting a child. She spent her days at home. She maintained the order that was considered normal. But behind that order was exhaustion. Marilyn felt lonely in a house full of people. Sam's patients came and went. The phone rang almost constantly. In the evenings, her husband came home late, tired, irritated, his thoughts somewhere beyond the walls of the house. She tried not to be in the way. Her ability to remain unnoticed became her most dangerous trait. Later, neighbors would remember small details. That Marilyn had begun to look anxious more often. That she complained about noises at night. That she said she was afraid to be alone. At the time, it didn't sound serious. Nerves, they said. Pregnancy. She's imagining things. In 1954, people didn't know how to listen to women who didn't scream. Sam Sheppard didn't listen either. He was busy. He had a reputation, a career, a life that demanded attention. And Marilyn adjusted. Their house stood near Lake Erie. In the summer, the windows were left open, the night air freely entering the rooms. Doors were often left unlocked. That was simply how things were done. Marilyn said more than once that she felt uneasy. "I think someone is watching," she said once. Sam brushed it off. "You're thinking too much." Those words would later grow unbearably heavy. On the evening of July 3rd, the house was quiet. The television played softly. Marilyn went to bed early. Pregnancy was taking its toll. Sam stayed awake. Outside, everything seemed calm. Too calm. Sometimes, the most dangerous moment is the one when no one expects anything to happen. Marilyn lay down to sleep, not knowing it would be her last night. Not knowing that in the morning, everyone would talk about her, but no longer as a person. The house believed to be safe was preparing to become a crime scene. And the woman everyone had learned not to notice was about to disappear, giving way to theories, suspicions, and noise. Sometimes, tragedy doesn't begin with a blow. It begins when no one listens. The night broke apart just before dawn. A sound. A movement. Something that didn't belong. Sam Sheppard would later say he was asleep on the couch downstairs when he heard Marilyn scream. That he ran up the stairs. That a struggle followed. That a shadow, tall, pale, indistinct, moved through the bedroom. That a blow to his head sent him into darkness. Those words would be repeated, dissected, doubted. But in the early hours of July 4th, 1954, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was the house. The front door was open. Screens were torn. Drawers stood ajar, as if someone had searched without urgency. Upstairs, the bedroom no longer resembled the quiet place Marilyn had fallen asleep in just hours earlier. Blood marked the walls, the bed, the floor. Marilyn lay on her back, brutally beaten, her nightgown torn. The violence was excessive, personal in a way that made even seasoned officers hesitate before stepping closer.
She was 4 months pregnant. The room carried no clarity, only questions. The first officers arrived quickly, too quickly for order to form. Neighbors gathered. Friends of the family appeared. Reporters followed. By mid-morning, the Sheppard home was no longer a private space. It was a spectacle. People walked through rooms that should have been sealed. Footprints overlapped. Evidence shifted unnoticed. No one was in control. And Sam Sheppard, injured but conscious, sat in the middle of it all, dazed, bleeding, repeating the same fractured story. I tried to stop him. I chased him. I blacked out. Some believed him immediately. Others didn't. Suspicion doesn't always arrive with proof. Sometimes it arrives with expectation. Sam was a husband. He was the last person to see Marilyn alive. He survived. That alone was enough to plant the idea. Officers noticed inconsistencies, small ones, the kind that grow larger when repeated. Why wasn't the house fully ransacked? Why were some items disturbed and others untouched? Why did the story change slightly each time it was told? Questions multiplied faster than answers. And outside, the press waited. By afternoon, headlines had begun to form, not on paper yet, but in minds. The handsome doctor, the dead wife, the quiet suburb. It was a story people recognized. And Marilyn, at the center of it all, was already slipping away again, reduced to photographs, measurements, and speculation. No one asked what she had feared. No one asked who she had tried to warn. The focus shifted quickly, from what happened to who should pay. By nightfall, Sam Sheppard was no longer just a grieving husband. He was a suspect. And the house on the quiet street, once a symbol of safety and status, had become something else entirely. A place where truth was already being rearranged. The crime scene was compromised. The narrative was forming. And Marilyn's voice, the only one that mattered, was gone. By the next morning, the story no longer belonged to the police. It belonged to the newspapers. Headlines didn't shout yet. They suggested. They hinted. They leaned just far enough to point in one direction. A respected doctor, a beautiful pregnant wife, a violent death inside a quiet home. The public didn't need details. It filled them in on its own. Reporters gathered outside the Sheppard house as if it were a courthouse. Cameras clicked, notebooks filled. Neighbors were interviewed whether they wanted to speak or not. He always seemed so calm. They argued sometimes. You never really know what goes on behind closed doors. Each sentence chipped away at doubt and replaced it with certainty. Sam Sheppard watched it happen from a hospital bed. His injuries were real, the bandages were visible, but none of it mattered anymore. In the court of public opinion, he was already standing alone. Police pressure increased. Interviews grew longer. Questions grew sharper. Patience wore thin. Sam repeated his account again and again. The order shifted slightly. A word changed. A detail blurred. It was enough. "You're not helping yourself," one detective said. Sam stared at the floor. "I'm telling you what I remember." Memory, they decided, was unreliable. The idea settled in quickly and comfortably. The husband did it. It explained everything too neatly to resist. No unknown intruder, no random violence, no unanswered fears. Just a domestic tragedy, familiar, digestible, complete. Marilyn became a symbol instead of a person. The pregnant wife, the silent victim, the reason for outrage, but never the reason for questions. The trial began long before anyone entered a courtroom. Jurors read the papers, Neighbors whispered. Strangers felt entitled to opinions. Sam Sheppard was convicted daily in print. By the time charges were formally filed, the outcome felt inevitable. Not because the case was strong, but because the story was already written. Inside the evidence, gaps remained. A possible weapon never conclusively identified, a trail outside the house that led nowhere, signs that someone else may have been present, quietly set aside. They complicated the narrative, and narratives were no longer welcome. Sam Sheppard sat alone one evening, staring at a photograph of Marilyn taken months before her death. She was smiling gently, unaware, still unnoticed. He wondered, not for the first time, how everything had slipped so far, so fast. Not just the investigation, but Marilyn herself. Her fears, her loneliness, her voice. They had all been there, and no one had listened. When the trial finally began, it felt less like a search for truth and more like a performance reaching its final act. The audience was ready. The verdict felt pre-written. And somewhere beneath the noise, the real question remained untouched. What if they had been wrong from the beginning? The second trial felt nothing like the first. There were no crowds pressing against the doors, no eager reporters competing for quotes, no sense of spectacle, only distance. Years had passed. The world had moved on. What once felt urgent now felt uncomfortable, a reminder of how easily certainty had been manufactured. Sam Sheppard returned to court older, quieter, marked by time that could not be returned. His posture was different, not defeated, resigned. He no longer expected belief. This time, the evidence was allowed to speak. The compromised crime scene was acknowledged. Witness statements were re-examined. Details once dismissed were placed back into context. The prosecution no longer sounded confident. The story no longer fit together. Too many gaps, too many assumptions. And for the first time, Marilyn's death was treated not as a conclusion, but as a question. The jury deliberated longer than anyone expected. Hours turned into days. When the verdict was read, it landed without drama. Not guilty. No applause followed, no celebration, just silence. Sam Sheppard was free. Freedom, however, came strangely. The years in prison could not be undone. The reputation could not be restored. The marriage could not be reclaimed. And Marilyn remained dead. The truth had arrived, but far too late to matter in the way it should have. In the years that followed, attention shifted again, to a different suspect, to a man who had worked nearby, to evidence that might have mattered if it had been pursued sooner. No conviction ever followed. The case closed quietly, without resolution. Marilyn Sheppard's name rarely appeared in headlines anymore. When it did, it was usually as a footnote, a victim in a famous miscarriage of justice, a detail in a larger story about the system. But Marilyn was more than that. She was a woman who felt afraid, who tried to be heard, who lived in a house that promised safety and delivered none. The case left behind a legacy. It changed how courts handled media influence. It reshaped rules around fair trials. It became a warning taught in law schools. But lessons do not comfort the dead. Sometimes justice arrives too late to save anyone. Sometimes the wrong story is louder than the right one. And sometimes the greatest tragedy is not only the crime itself, but how quickly the world decides it understands. Marilyn Sheppard was noticed eventually, just not when it mattered.